Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you, featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. We have a very special guest today. His name is Michael Solomon, and he's the author of The Conversion Prophecy. Michael's written a few books, but this is his newest, and Michael is going to talk about something, it's fictitious, but he's going to talk about his book, and it's a kind of political book. Wouldn't you say, Michael, that this book is fictional? It's a really political story, is it not?
Well, it is. It's a political thriller, similar to The Manchurian Candidate. And oddly enough, I wrote it as a novel and as fiction. But there are so many things in the book that are starting to come true that I have people who have read it who've just called me up and said to me, "My God, how did you know?" So I said, I didn't know, and I'm not, I'm not Nostradamus, but I made some predictions based on things that I surmised and things that I realized what were going on in the world in the last couple of years, and put it down on paper. And,
now, Michael, I first of all, I didn't welcome you to my show again. It's just a pleasure to have you on. Now, let's talk. You're welcome. And let's now talk about the basis of the conversion prophecy.
Well, it started a couple of years ago. I've written a political book, and I've been writing op-eds for the last couple of years. And one of the things that I wrote, an article I wrote a couple of years ago, was 3 ways to defeat a nation without the use of a military. One was politically, one was psychosocially, and one was economically. The political one, of course, is to try to get into their political system and to overthrow a government and so forth. The psychosocial is what's happening in the United States these days, where we have a tremendous influx of political correctness that's destroying this nation from within. When I speak in public, I'm afraid to open my mouth without having a lawyer from the ACLU there with me. It's ridiculous. And economically, it's trying to destroy it to economy. You can do it by regulating or manipulating the price of oil, or China manipulating their currency, which can affect the balance of our power economically and whatever. So I put this all down, and I thought about it, and that was it. And then when the bailout came, when President Obama came into office, I started to scratch my head, and I'm saying, wait a minute. Citibank was just bailed out by the Saudis for They got 4.9% of their stock for a $13 billion loan at 11%, when prime at the time was like under 2. And I'm scratching my head. I'm saying, okay. And we bailed out Citibank, or Citigroup at the time, with top money. And I'm saying, why did we bail them out? The Saudis and the Chinese own them. Why are we bailing them out? And then they started in with this too big to fail scenario, and I'm scratching my head saying, let's see, was Pan Am too big to fail? Was American Motors too big to fail? Was Eastern Airlines too big to fail? Enron wasn't too big to fail. MCI Telephonics wasn't too big to fail. I'm scratching my head and I'm saying, why wasn't GM too big to fail? And why wasn't Citibank too big to fail? They could have broken it back up into regional banks and taken out Travelers Insurance and Smith Barney, and they could have gone back to what they were doing, which was successful corporations, until they all got swallowed up because the Glass-Steagall Act was repealed by Clinton back in 1998. Then I started to see another trend. There was the covenants of the Quran prohibit Muslims from dealing in alcohol, gambling, and vice. And suddenly there was a Muslim family or some Muslim money that purchased a big gambling hotel, purchased a Palms Hotel in Las Vegas. And then there was something else going on, and I started scratching my head. And then Sharia-compliant financing was coming to the state of Washington, in some big banks in Seattle, and I scratched my head saying, where's all this money coming from? And how's it being developed? And then I started to put this whole thing together, and then I said, you know what, I got to research this. So I did the best research I could. I read the Quran, and I saw how they can convince or fool their enemies by doing certain things. There are 2 covenants in the Quran, one called Taqiyya and the other one Kitman, which allows you to pretend you're an enemy for the purpose of coercing them into conversion. So I says, well, what if that's happening in the real world? I says, how could Islam buy up the control of major corporations in the world? So I put this whole scenario together, and I compared it to the way Disney bought the property in Orlando. Mm-hmm. His biggest mistake when he built Disneyland in California, in Anaheim, was he didn't buy up all the property around it. And he realized that after he opened the park, all these honky-tonk motels and souvenir shops started opening up, and everybody selling T-shirts and everything else. And, it looks like honky-tonk out there. Sure. So what he did was he got a hold of he opened up about, I don't know how many, 75 or 100 little real estate brokerage houses in Orlando, and they were buying up a little property there, a little property here. And then all of a sudden one day they consolidated, and before you know it, Disney is now has controlling interest of Orange County, Florida. They built the park. There's no honky-tonk souvenir shops and little $6 a night motels. No Motel 6s all around. They are, but they're not close to the park. And I said, well, what if that's happening in the corporate world? What if all this oil money that's being funneled off and all the rumors about drug money being used for terrorism and everything else being controlled by Islam, what if that money is being bought up, is going into buying up stock of major corporations, but yet not enough to be noticed, but just small enough to fly under the radar so that the regulatory agencies like the SEC and the European regulatory agencies don't see it. So basically the story is that all the Saudi money, or not Saudi, but all this Islamic money, or Muslim money that's coming from drugs and gambling and advice and oil is being funneled into small brokerage houses all over the world, and they buy a little bit of it here and a little bit of it there. And suddenly one day they consolidate it and announce to the world, we own it all. We own the food supply, we own the water supply, we own transportation, the internet, telecommunications, oil, you name it. And you either fly the Islamic flag or we starve you out.
Oh, boy.
So that's the basis of the book. Mm-hmm. And yet, since the book's been out, things that I've mentioned in the book have happened. For example, in the book I talk about Verizon becoming the only internet supplier in the world, and what happens in May, 30 days after the book hits the market, is they buy AOL. Now they're looking to go after other major internet providers. Dinar Holdings is a company that suddenly owns 80% of all the water supply in the world, fresh water. Mm-hmm. In the book I say that by 2020 there'll only be two national airlines in America, and since the U.S. Air merger with American last 2 months ago, we're now down to 3, and it only takes one more to consolidate, and my theory comes true.
Right.
So it's frightening, but it's happening.
Well, you just mentioned that it's really frightening, but let's take a look at your book for a moment. In the book, the beginning of the book, you talk about the Vice President of the United States dying. Mm-hmm. Now, what does that have to do with terrorism? Was there something in your mind that said, let's kind of do something controversial where the Vice President dies? What was the reason for that? Well,
the story deals with a Manchurian candidate who was, remember the article that I wrote on the 3 ways to defeat a nation without the use of a military, one being politically, was that here we have a Manchurian candidate who is slated to become extremely high up in the White House. And in order to move into position quickly, it has to be done through either death or resignation of a high government official. In this case, it was the vice president. So what does that do is it moves the next person in line on a short list to become the vice president. And, of course, down the road, if he's successful, the order of progression is that he becomes the president, runs for his party, and that's it. So then, and that's what the plot entails. So the leader of this entire global economic takeover of the world is actually being conspired with not only Islam, but somebody who is of Islam belief, who's high up in the American government. And the death of the vice president, the opening of the book, basically people have to be moved around on a board like chess pieces so that they fall into position, and that's basically how I wrote the book. There's a lot of flashback in time, but it doesn't confuse the reader, and it's not overly loaded with characters like a Russian novel. We have to remember everybody. So that's basically why the death of the vice president. And it all, at the end of the book, I don't want to give it away because I don't want the readers to know it, but there's a major surprise at the end. And it all falls into place then, and you suddenly realize why it had happened that way.
Michael, I want to talk a lot about the issue of terrorism, but first I would like people to understand what is it about you that you became interested in writing these kinds of subjects? Because, you started out owning a business, and then you got involved as a consultant for many of the television stations, but this particular topic is a tough one and something that not everybody wants to talk about. So tell me about Michael. I want our audience first, before we really get into the book, I want them to understand you.
God, that's never been asked that question before. I get up in the morning and I look in the mirror every morning when I shave and wash, and I say, okay, now what? I guess I've always had a curious mind. I always believe in learning. And I believe that we learn right up to the day we close our eyes for the final time, and that every day is a new adventure. And I'm an out-of-the-box thinker. It's funny because I do a lot of corporate motivational lectures, and when I do, I basically try to teach my audience how to think outside the box, and not only think outside the box, but then beyond it, and how to make the box actually work for you. Basically, I talk to people that sometimes you have to just take the tools you have that you've given and try to adapt them in another way. And I guess that's my thinking, too. I look at, my dad used to say to me, if you're looking at the glass and it's half full, if you want a full glass, get a smaller glass. You don't have to fill the glass, just get a smaller vessel. Yeah. So, I've looked at it that way, and I basically say, okay, this is what I got to work with. How do I get it better? Cut down the glass. If it's a paper cup and it's half full, take a scissor and cut the rim around it and make it smaller, so now it looks like it's full. Yeah. So, life is basically measured in successes and failures, and you have to learn to live with you have to learn to take your failures and turn them around into successes. And I've always looked at it this way, that a person is not a failure. Mm-hmm. An event is a failure. Failure is an event. I mean, if you tried something in business or in life or in a relationship and it didn't work out and it failed, it doesn't mean you failed as a person. Right. The event failed. So, step back, readjust, find another way and do it. Yeah. Until you succeed. I've always told people that you never, when I do lectures in colleges, I tell students, I says, just because you failed the course doesn't mean you're a failure. I said, you're not a failure until you stop trying.
There you go. Stop trying. I think this is a very important point, and it really is a very inspirational, I think. Now, let's get back to the book. So your book deals with the utopian view of the world that suddenly turns dystopian in an effort to convert the world to Islam. Now, how did you come up with that narrative? You talked a little bit about it at the beginning, but let's delve into that.
Well, basically what I did was I did my research and I said, you know what if, I said, none of this seems to be working. I mean, all this terrorism that's going on in the world today, yeah, I mean, people are getting killed. They're blowing up cities and buildings and they're doing mass murders all over the place, but it's not working. France isn't converting to Islam. Mm-hmm. London isn't converting to Islam. The U.S. isn't converting to Islam yet. Sharia law isn't taking hold as well as much as people want it to. I mean, yes, can it happen? Sure. But then I said, well, what if there was peace in the world? What if everybody learned to love each other and get along?
Yeah, but Michael, let me stop you here. Now, What are the chances of that? Because I
slim to none. That's why it's a novel.
There you go. Okay, because you're right, slim to none. Because when you travel in Europe and other places, you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, that...
Well, I would. I mean, I was in Istanbul last summer, one block away from where that suicide bomber killed those people, right outside the Blue Mosque the other day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's an example. But another example is if you walk in London, all you see are women walking around with the cover-ups.
Well, who knows if they're women?
Ah, interesting. So,
somebody sent me a joke once. They said the nice part about marrying a Muslim woman is if you get divorced, you never have to change the picture on your desk.
There you go.
Edit that out, Susan, please.
Now, the cover design of your book is very provocative. If the audience was able to see it, they would notice that it kind of looks like it's the Soviet Union.
Well, no, it's really not. It's because the Soviet Union is a sickle. This is a moon. This is a moon.
So how'd you come up with that?
Well, it's funny because I did the final design. Believe it or not, I sat down with the graphic designer and I said, "This is what I'd like." What we were going to do is, since the story deals with the Islamic takeover of the world, my publisher had the idea of planting an Islamic flag into the globe and showing one flag flying over the entire world. So we started looking at it, and we said, well, which Islamic flag do we want to use? The Saudi flag, the Yemen flag, the black flag that ISIS is using? I said, but then we realized that all those flags have one common denominator, and that was the crescent with the red star.
Right.
So I said, well, how about if we take the picture of, which was known as the blue marble, which is the one that was taken of the Earth from the moon, and we surround it with the red crescent, and we have the star on the side. And then, of course, I won't tell your audience what's in the background in the watermark, because that becomes the hero in the book, so they would have to actually look at it and read it. And, of course, if they go on Amazon, they can certainly see the cover and see the cover design. They can read the reviews, which are unbelievable. I was shocked at some of them. But that's basically what it deals with.
Mm-hmm. Now, Michael, let me ask you this. We're told, and I'm talking about, we're told by our government, the presidents, the vice president, everybody in the Congress, that we have to be very vigilant. We have to look around, make sure there's nothing that is threatening us. But, I always question that, because I say, how do we do that? I mean, most people don't think that there's going to be a bomb on their train, and they don't know what to look for. So what do you say to that?
Well, they know what to look for, but here's the problem. Let's look back at San Bernardino last month, or 6 weeks ago. The woman next door said she knew there was something suspicious going on, but she was afraid to call the police or let anybody know. Okay. Why? Because she didn't want to be labeled a racist. This country has become so politically intolerable, or I like to say political correctness has gone out the window. By the way, people don't even know where political correctness started. It started in 1936 in the Frankfurt School in Germany, and it was a way to get governments to control speech patterns of people. And it was all a communist ideal. They were pushing it. Russia was pushing it in through Germany, through the Frankfurt School. If you look up the history of political correctness, that's where it comes from. So it was basically the government trying to control speech patterns. It's the same thing is happening in the United States today. God forbid you said something off color. I go into a restaurant and I have a young black waiter come up to me and say, "I'm going to be your servant today." And I look at him and I'm saying, "My God, the word servant comes from servitude, which denotes slavery. Pretty soon the word server is going to become politically incorrect." So, I scratch my head and I'm saying, this country has no idea. I'm waiting for Hollywood to get on the bandwagon. Nobody wants to be called an actor or an actress anymore. Okay? So what are they doing now? They're giving out, so if everybody's in the same category, then let's stop giving out the Best Actress Award and just give out the Best Actor, whether you're a male or a female, and eliminate one award. Look at the money we'll save on a statue and the TV time. So, it gets out of control. It's out of hand. So basically what happened with terrorism out in San Bernardino is they didn't want to be termed a racist. And I got to tell you something. If you are sued as a racist, now this may sound a little funny, but it's true, and anybody listening to this can check with their insurance brokers. If you are sued as a racist for violation of the Civil Rights Act, your insurance company won't cover you. You on your own. You better hire your own attorney and pay for it out of your pocket. It's something that very few people know about. I know about that because I was involved with a lawsuit about 10 years ago. Somebody on the board of a condo board was suing me because they didn't like my landscaping. And they were doing it outside of the board, and they sued me on their own. And so I just went back and we countersued under Civil Rights Act of 1984. And their attorney he says, "Well, it's all right. I'll give it to my insurance company." Their attorney says, "Nope, can't be done." He said you were violating his right to live peaceably in his home, and he's suing you for that.
Oh boy!
And he dropped the suit because he knew it was going to cost him about $100,000 in legal fees. So people have to realize that you can't just, if you racially profile somebody or you get sued for being a racist, you can be on your own.
Mm-hmm. Now, what happens when you scream? Say you're in a movie and you scream fire. What happens?
There better be a fire.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
There better be a fire, and not just on the screen. Yelling fire in the theater, and I look at it another way. In my last book, when I talked about it, my book called "Where Did My America Go?" and I talked about the First Amendment and screaming fire in the theater, is giving the Ku Klux Klan a permit to march in Skokie, Illinois, in a Jewish neighborhood, the same as yelling fire in the theater. These people are coming from out of state. They're only there to incite violence, or when the Aryan Nation marched in Cleveland a couple of years ago in a black neighborhood. It was the same thing. So giving them a permit is that not yelling fire in the theater?
Yeah.
I mean, every case is individual, but it's crazy. But again, you've got to think outside the box with these things. It's funny. I had a conversation with Supreme Court Judge Antoine Scalia once. We were talking about when he voted to allow the American flag to be burned under the First Amendment, and his reasoning was extremely brilliant. He said the flag is a symbol. He said it's not a big deal. He says yes, it is a big deal because it's the American flag. He says, but when you burn the flag, he said, so let's say you can't burn the flag and we have you with a $500 fine. He says most of the flag burnings take place in public parks. People want to do it, during demonstrations. Mm-hmm. He said the flag is the accelerant. Starting the fire is against the law.
Right.
You get a bigger bang for your buck if you lock the guy up for arson than if you gave him a summons for burning the flag. And he's right. So, you got to think beyond what again, thinking out of the box and think beyond your nose. It sounds silly, but that's exactly what it is.
Now, in the prologue of your book, The Conversion Prophecy, you write, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And
right, Genesis 1. Right.
So what motivated you to put that in the book at the beginning?
I looked at, I had two openings and two endings in the book. And the second ending this is the one I chose to use. But the reason I did that is because I looked at it, and if you read on in the prologue, it discusses that God rested in all His work which He had done in creation. He looked back and said that it was done, and He rested. And then I go on to say that it began. Later, men and women replicated, creating families, and then multiplied even further. And as the earth became inhabited, tribes developed and formed their own beliefs about the Creator and who guided them spiritually. And over the years, millions of years, wars have been fought in the name of religion. And then what I basically end the prologue on is that it says when one religious group tried to force their beliefs on the rest of the world, when that didn't succeed, they stopped their vicious ways. In other words, terrorism was gone, in favor of pursuing a more peaceful but devious plan to bring the world to its knees.
Yeah.
And so that new plan is we're going to settle this in another way. We're going to have peace in the world, and we'll do it economically behind the scenes. They won't know.
So is this a metaphor for stopping war and looking at God and saying to God, why if you care about the world and you care about everybody being peaceful, why are you not doing anything about this Islamic fanatic behavior?
I'll give you another metaphor for that. Okay, if we look at Genesis, I mean, it, and we look at the scientific reasons the word was formed. We talk about either the way it was written in the Bible, or we look at the Big Bang Theory. You got to say to yourself, was a day, or is a day 30 million years? So if a day was 30 million years, and the Earth is now 6 times 3 is 180 million years old, and God rested on the seventh day, well, maybe it's not a day, maybe it's 30 million years.
Yeah.
Maybe He's coming back soon.
Do you believe
on the eighth, I don't know. I'm not. You got to ask. You got to ask the Christians and the Jews and the Muslims about the 12th Imam coming back, and the Messiah and everybody else.
Sure.
So, but I say to myself, well, maybe that seventh period or that seventh day, which could be 30 million years, isn't up yet, and God's going to come back on the eighth day and look back at the world and say, my God, pardon the pun, what have I created? And maybe it'll start to rain again.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. That's what they did with Noah. He washed it out, and started over. So I don't know. I'm just saying that as a metaphor that maybe as you say, well, why would He let it happen? Because He doesn't know it's happening. He's resting.
Yeah.
And when He wakes up in the morning and says, okay, time to go back to work, He's going to look back and see what happened last night and say, or last period, and say, oh my God, pardon the pun, what have I created?
Yeah.
What's this turned into?
Now, your book, of course, we've talked about the fact that it's about Islam and their plan to terrorize the world and take over. I always tell a story. I said when Janet Reno, when the office of the Clintons were leaving, and Janet Reno was interviewed after that, she said they asked her what she was going to do, and she said the one most important thing that she has to do is to fight cyber terrorism. Now, the time she talked about that, nobody even thought too much about it.
It was 15 years ago.
That's right. And now we know, and the book deals with this, that defeating Islam's plan to convert the world to Islam through a new form of economic terrorism that's nonviolent, you say, yet devastating to the global economy. So talk more about that, because you found a solution to defeating this plan in all places, including the Quran. Aren't you concerned with the publicity about books and movies about Islam, that you may have negative publicity or even receive a fatwa on your life?
Susan, I've lived my life. If it's over, it's over. My kids will be very rich when the book sells after I'm gone.
So that's
no, I don't. That's not what my thought is.
Yeah.
Do I want a fatwa on my head? No. By the way, people don't even know what a fatwa is. A fatwa, literally defined in the Quran and in Sharia law is a judgment. I mean, they may look at my book and say, Solomon gave us a better way.
Yeah, right.
So we like him. I don't know. I don't think so, because there's a hero in the book which they're not going to be happy with, which I won't reveal.
Right.
You have to read it, and it's a hell of a surprise in the last chapter. The reviews I've been getting of people calling me, or people I know, and they say, my God, I wasn't expecting that. And I'm saying, okay, thank you. But am I worried about it? I can't live. I have to live in the moment. I can't live and worry about tomorrow. It's like Wayne Dwyer, the famous psychologist, rest his soul, nice guy. He used to say, worrying about tomorrow only makes you miserable today.
Yeah.
If you're planning to go to a ball game tomorrow or play golf or whatever, and you're worried it's going to rain tomorrow and it's going to screw up your day, all it's going to do is make you feel miserable tonight. So I can't worry about tomorrow. If I wake up in the morning and the headlines in the Times say, fatwa revealed on author's head, okay, I'll worry about it tomorrow. Am I looking for one? No. So if I do, I'm turning a lot of people. We're going to be a big group looking for it, because they're turning this into, they're not turning it into a movie yet, but they're writing a screenplay in Hollywood on this story. Wow. So it's, I won't be the only one.
Yeah, there you go.
There'll be a few Hollywood producers too, but
yeah. Michael,
and I'm sure Sony's not going to want to produce it. So. Not after the North Korean deal.
Michael, forget about your book for just a moment.
Sure.
In your mind, if you sat down and you started to think about the worst things that are happening in the world, would it be cyber terrorism?
No, it would be EMPs. The world can be brought to its knees in a matter of hours with a tremendous magnetic storm, which can be caused by a low-yielding atom bomb being exploded in the atmosphere 100 miles above the Earth, or a giant sunspot. About 4 years ago, the Earth was 3 months ahead of losing half the electrical power in the world. An EMP, electromagnetic pulse, will shut down the entire electrical grid anyways. You just think of some of the scenarios that have happened in the past. Let's go back to 1969 or 1989. 2 major blackouts in America. The whole northeast corridor of the United States was down. Back in 89, we weren't so dependent on computers and electronics as we are today.
Right.
If you shut down the entire northeast corridor of the United States for 24 hours or 72 hours or 48 hours and nothing runs, think about this. There will be no airlines, no financial transactions. Everything's computerized. There will be no ATM machines working. There will be no stock market working. There will be no transportation, no food moving because everything is scheduled through computers, and everything works that way. So that is probably the biggest threat to the world anyways. You shut down the New York Stock Exchange listen, we did it after 9/11. They shut it down for a week and a half. Not a big deal. It worked. There was still trades going on, but they weren't going through the exchange. But you take that, shut the banks down, so no ATMs, no money's flowing, no currency is flowing, no food transportation, no water flowing, no airlines flying, nothing works, no logistics anyways, because there are no computers working that run everything. That is the biggest threat the world has today.
Wow.
Terrorism we can deal with. We can always, if we had a president who was strong enough and he wanted to put together a coalition and 10 countries sent 15,000 troops apiece, we can have 150,000 troops on the ground in Syria or wherever we need them in 2 weeks, and we can wipe these people out, just blow them off the face of the earth. That's what they deserve. But when you have an electromagnetic pulse, whether it's caused by Mother Nature or some cyber terrorist who wants to fire off a missile and drop one out of space, you're going to shut everything down. And what the amazing part about it is that the power companies in the United States and around the world can guard against it. But it's a little expensive. But the expense now is certainly not going to be what the expense would be if that occurred down the road. I mean, we're being in the old story about being penny wise and dollar foolish, and that's exactly what it is. I mean, they can get around it, but they're not doing it. So why are they doing it? Because they're worried about the bottom line of their corporations and what's going to cause, how they got to protect their stockholders. Well, how are they going to protect their stockholders if it happens and they're shut down for 6 months trying to rebuild?
Yeah, I mean, certainly that scenario doesn't
fly with me.
Yeah, it doesn't certainly fly with me either. Now, hold on. This is my last question to you.
Sure.
If you were sitting next to the President of the United States or to one of the people, say the Secretary of State, what would you say to them?
I'd hand them a letter of resignation and said, "What the hell's taking you so long?"
Okay. So that tells you where you're at. Now, of all
I can't believe how this government, and not only the president, but everybody involved in his cabinet and everybody else. I mean, I look at his press secretary and I got to scratch my head every day. How these people can lead from behind. They're reactive. Yeah. And not only, they want to be reactive, but they're not even reacting. There's a policy of being proactive and being reactive. Proactive would be, okay, we're going to put a stop to this. I mean, if we had somebody in the White House like Ronald Reagan, you know what Reagan did when he took over? He made one phone call the day he was sworn into office. He called the Ayatollah in Iran and said, "You will let our hostages out within the next 24 hours because you do not want me to come and get them." They were released 24 hours later.
So what?
I mean, if we had a leader like that, or it doesn't even have to be him, but if somebody stood up and said to ISIS, you know what, you lay down a red line, you better be ready to defend it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we have lost all respect for anybody. I mean, why would ISIS even bother when a president turns around and he says, "Okay, let's do this"? You know, he signed this. We didn't even sign it yet. This agreement with Iran for nuclear weapons. There's one thing in that agreement that nobody's even looking at. It says that Iran can't build a bomb for whatever 5, 7, 10 years. I don't care if it's 100 years. We're giving them $150 billion or $180 billion, which is supposed to net down to 120, according to Secretary Kerry. Okay. But also what's in that agreement is the fact that they have a right now to sell their oil on the open market. Mm-hmm. Well, they're going to pick up another $75 to $100 billion a year on top of that. So they're going to be sitting around with $200 billion. There's nothing in an agreement that says they can't buy a bomb from North Korea or Pakistan or anywhere else or Russia.
Yeah. Well, wait a minute, Michael.
And they're testing missiles now for a delivery system, and we're just sitting back scratching our heads.
Mm-hmm. So if that scenario is taking place, what's wrong with the population? Why aren't people just banging on the door of the Congress, telling them there's something wrong? And we have a whole bunch of people who are running for president. So that'll be my last question to you. And maybe you don't want to answer, but first, why aren't people aware that if they stand up to the U.S. government and say something is wrong here, why don't they do that?
Because you and I don't have the ability to pick up the phone and call IRS and say, I don't like what that group is saying or what that person is saying. Let's order them. Let's take his finances away. Think about it. I mean, it sounds like it, but that's the arch enemy in the United States against the American people.
Yeah, but
that's I'm using that as facetiously, but the problem is people are starting to wake up. Listen, do I like everything that Donald Trump is saying? No, but has he hit on a nerve in this country? You bet he has, and everything he's saying is the truth, and people know it. Mm-hmm. Does he have the ability to do it? Presidents don't have to be the smartest person on the face of the earth. They have to be good leaders, good administrators. They have to know how to hire the right people and listen to their experts. This president of the United States has had 4 or 5 secretaries of defense. He has had the major generals in the Pentagon resigning because he won't listen to them because of everything else that they're talking about. He has changed his cabinet. I can't tell you how many times. He's gone through two attorney generals. Mm-hmm. He is basically the puppeteer pulling the puppet strings, and it's almost like everybody's afraid to talk to him. I joked about, somebody said to me, what do you think of Chicago politics? Yeah. Half of your listeners are not going to understand what I'm about to say, but my theory about Chicago politics is I wonder if Mrs. O'Leary's cow was trying to teach us a lesson.
Yeah.
Now, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, in 1871, Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked over a lantern and started the Great Chicago Fire, which burned the city down. Right. Problem was somebody called the fire department back then.
Yeah.
But that's it's ridiculous. I mean, do I know? I mean, it's I don't know what we're going to do.
I know. So you talked at the beginning of the show about the glass being half full or half empty. Mm-hmm. It sounds like in this particular case that you kind of are feeling it's half empty. No? It may just be damp. I don't need. The remnants that hang around the bottom of a glass after you've drank from it. I mean, it's ridiculous. We have lost the shine. I mean, it's frightening. If God forbid, we had to get into a conflict anywhere in the world in the next 30 days, 60 days, and it's very possible. Mm-hmm. Our army is back to 1960 levels. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We don't have the manpower or the firepower. I mean, we would have to go back to an effort like we had in World War II to rebuild. Yeah. So, Michael, you're an expert, and I mean that, about politics and.
Well, I don't really consider myself an expert, but I have a way of looking at things that I can explain it in simple terms that people understand.
So why aren't you running for congressman, senator? You belong there, don't you think?
Oh my gosh, Susan. Two things. I don't think I have enough time on the face of the earth to get done what I'd like to get done. Takes too much time, too much effort, too much money, and you got to be beholden to everybody. If I was Donald Trump and I had the money like he's got behind me, I wouldn't have to be beholden to anybody. I could turn around and say, here's a $500 million. I'm running for this, and I don't care if I lose my money or whatever. I'm trying to make this right. But it's nice to think about it, and I'd love to do it, but I had the quote of the week on TV about a little while ago. I was on a business show, on the national business show, and we were talking about the economy and the numbers, and people scratched their heads, and I said, this administration has to become bilingual, and the second language has to be the truth.
Yeah.
You can't tell people that unemployment is 5%, and it's the greatest it's been in the last 10 years. It was under 5% when Bush was in office, and it's the greatest it's been in the last 10 years. When it's actually over 38%, and I'll tell you how I come up with that number. There are 310 million people living in this country. Out of those 310 million people, about 85 to 90 million are ineligible to work. They're senior citizens, they're kids in school, they're disabled, they're people who can't work for one reason or another. Okay, so that brings down the workforce to about 225 to 230 million people.
Right.
90 million people have stopped looking for work and are out of work. You just do the math. That's 38.5%. So for him to tell me that 5% of people, sure, because the people whose unemployment checks have run out, who've quit, do you know how much worse it would be if unemployment was the way it was when I was growing up, Susan?
Yeah, well,
for those people who don't know it out there, unemployment, you got 26 weeks from the federal government, 13 weeks from the state. After 39 weeks, your unemployment ran out. There was no food stamps. There was no other welfare. That was it. In your 36th week, when you knew you had one or two checks left, you ran out and you got any job you can get your hands on. You could wash windows if you had to, sweep streets. But no, people today are collecting more in unemployment, more in food stamps than anything else than they could take home if they had a $50,000 a year job for a family of four. Why would they want to go to work? They have no commutation. Person earning $50,000 a year with a family of four is coming home with about $600 a week. He's collecting over $500 in unemployment and food stamps, and he has no commutation costs. He doesn't have to buy his lunches. Why would he want to go to work?
Exactly. Well, you've kind of put in front of us something for us to really consider, and I think it's really important that people read the book, the Conversion Prophecy, because there's inside that book, although it's fiction, I think there's a lot for us to learn. So I want to thank you, Michael Solomon, for being on my show again, and I'd like to invite you back because, I'm sure there's another book in store for you, and if there isn't, you just mentioned a movie. So tell our audience, last but not least, what is in store for Michael Solomon?
Well, right now I'm editing a book that I started to write before I wrote this, and then I put that on the back burner. And believe it or not, it's another mystery, but it's a tearjerker. It's a romance novel wrapped around a medical mystery. So it's
sex sells, you know that, Michael.
Well, and unfortunately, as much as it's a romance novel, there isn't any sex in it. Very little.
Kidding.
No, there's no sex.
Maybe you should add some.
No, I was thinking about it, but but I was thinking about that.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's always a sequel to the Conversion Prophecy.
There you go. So, anyway, thank you so much, Michael Solomon, for being on the Susan Brender Show.
My pleasure. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you for listening to the Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.